Well, hi, welcome to today's webinar presented and hosted by KaiNexus. It's entitled Engaging Senior Leaders to Accelerate Your Continuous Improvement Program. I'm Mark Rabin, a senior advisor with KaiNexus. I'm the host today, and I'm really excited that we have a KaiNexian as our presenter today. She is Stephanie Hill. She's a senior Lean Strategist with us here at KaiNexus, and I will tell you a little bit about her in a minute, give the more formal introduction. But before we do that, we have just a few announcements here about the logistics. If you could advance, please. Before I introduce Stephanie, I just want to welcome people. If it's your first time attending one of our webinars, we are KaiNexus. We have a software platform that is a solution for managing and tracking continuous improvement. Our mission is to spread continuous improvement. So if you'd like to learn more about what we do, you can go to kainexus.com or you can scan that QR code there. Okay, next please. So again, I'm thrilled that we have, as we call ourselves, a KaiNexian presenting here today. She's Stephanie Hill. She's a senior Lean Strategist here at KaiNexus. She's also owner of Lightbulb Moment Consulting. She has over 23 years of experience applying Lean in various industries, including legal, manufacturing, retail, insurance, healthcare, and government. She has certifications in strategic human resources leadership and scaled agile. She has a master black belt, or she is a master black belt in Lean Six Sigma. She has a master's degree in public health and a bachelor's degree in chemistry. She lives near Columbus, Ohio, and enjoys building Lego sets, dancing, and traveling. She's also preparing, and she's been writing and now getting ready to publish her first book titled A Life of Learning, Lessons in Leadership from Raising a Boy with Autism. So Stephanie, very excited to have you here to help us engage our senior leaders through your presentation and that worksheet that I'm going to put in the chat right now. There's the link. So Stephanie, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, thank you, Mark. All right, I'm glad you all could make it here today, and I appreciate how far everybody's traveled to be here virtually. So before I get too far into it, I do want to talk about a few terms, I guess a couple of terms that you see on this very first slide and how we'll be using it throughout this discussion. So first of all, when I say senior leaders, I'll also be using the term executive interchangeably with it. I know there's a slight difference between the two terms, but that's how I'm going to be talking throughout today. And the other piece of it is I'll be referring to your continuous improvement program. And so I might say CI, but the other thing to note is that this can apply to any kind of program that you have. So whether you're calling it Lean or Six Sigma, if you're calling it project management, whatever the case is, that's what we're talking about today. So I just wanted to cover that first. When I thought about doing this topic, there were a couple of reasons that really, I think that it occurred to me. So one of them is that as CI practitioners, it seems like we often forget to include executives in our execution of Lean or continuous improvement. And I think part of that has to do with, first of all, like I would say my upbringing in Lean was that you involve the frontline and you get them engaged because the things that they're producing, the services they're providing are directly tying to the customer. And so that's where you really wanted to focus a lot of your energy, and maybe with their leaders to ensure that they have the support and the time that they need to do the work. However, when we look at the executive team, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but we really need their engagement. I think we also might view as CI practitioners that our sphere of influence may not include the executive team. And so it's often a lot easier to just sort of focus our efforts elsewhere. So we're gonna tackle that gap today, and we're gonna make sure that we will address that. The other part that I thought was really important was the fact that I have seen a number of CI programs for people that I know very closely, that the program itself was really thriving. And they had like one executive who was a really strong advocate, a cheerleader for the program, that left the company. And once they did, because that was really the reach that they had, the CI program began declining, and eventually some of those whole programs might have failed entirely. So it's really important today that we not just talk about one executive, but talk about the entire senior leadership team. All right. So you've heard about me. I want to know at least a little bit about you. I saw where some of you live, where you're coming from, but I'd like to know your role. So if you could enter in the chat, if you view yourself as an executive or senior leader, a frontline leader, a CI practitioner, or some other role, go ahead and put that in the chat and we'll see what y'all have to say.
I'll read some of those off. CI practitioner, CXO, practitioner, director, practitioner, consultant, practitioner, site manager, frontline leader, practitioner, facilitator, consultant, practitioner, manager, CI practitioner / business owner, director of supply chain. So it looks like, a lot of practitioners, consultants, coaches, kind of dominating.
Okay, so not tons of executives, but if we were in the room together and we heard from a few executives, I would probably have a really awkward moment where I'd have everybody look at the executives and say, do they look different from you? Could you pick them out in a crowd? And the answer would probably be no. I know this because I just did this exercise in person with some folks. And the reason for that is because the executives are not like a mysterious creature. They are not different from you and I, from you and me. So the first thing I would say is when you're looking at influencing your executives for CI behavior, the first thing you probably want to do is think about how you personally would like to be influenced to do something new or to try something new, and really apply that first when you're thinking about how you're going to do this. All right, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So overall, when we want a continuous improvement culture to really thrive and to do really great things and to be sustainable, we need to have senior leadership buy-in and engagement. And so I think the term influencer is really popular out in the social media world, but I think of the executive team as being like the influencers of an organization. And so we're looking to them to see what they value and what behaviors they do in order to see what is the right thing for us to do, the things that are acceptable in our organization. So we're going to talk about that in a CI lens. We're going to be looking at what buy-in looks like, engagement gaps that there might be, and what we can do to overcome them. All right. Again, Mark mentioned there's going to be some chatting today. So when you think about, I know there's a lot of CI practitioners out there. When you think about your CI program, do you feel like you are pushing it where you really have to convince people to do some sort of engagement and do some sort of activity? Or do you feel like, even at the executive level, there's pull for your program where people want it, they're asking for it, they see the value? So in the chat, just put push or pull as to where you find your program.
All right, we see have to push more often than there's pull. Push, slow pull, 80% push, always push, push, both, push, pull. It's probably 80% push in the responses there.
Okay. That does not surprise me. So this is the picture that comes to my brain when I think about push. Granted, when you are an executive and you're feeling pushed to do a behavior, or any person in general, you don't necessarily feel like you're going to plunge, into the abyss. However, it is true that you don't know what's in front of you, that the more somebody pushes towards you, you're going to push back because you don't know what's ahead of you. It is a scary feeling. And granted, maybe the outcome may not be so severe. The actual emotions that come up for somebody can be like this. So we don't want to take an approach where we feel like we are pushing somebody against their will. Instead, we want to figure out ways to pull them toward us and to pull into the CI program. So that's going to be really important. So when we talk about generating pull, I think about 3 key elements that we want to combine together. So we want to talk about the timing, the relationships, and then understanding the individual's passion or what they value. So when we look at time, this is going to vary depending on the individual you're working with. So if they're always like excited about new things and they want to try something new, they heard something good about this whole thing, like you may need to not do so much with them as you would for somebody else. Whereas if somebody's a little bit more hesitant, you may want to get some things prepared prior to really pulling them in. So for example, in the CI world, you may want to have some established processes set up. You may want to have some measurable impact to demonstrate, whether it's internally or leveraging some benchmark information from other organizations. And you might want to have some wins that you can already share. Those wins may be better served coming from other people in the organization, not necessarily just from you. They may already know that you have an agenda to spread continuous improvement, which is the mission of KaiNexus. But if it's coming from somebody that they know that's in a different area completely, they may be willing to listen to that a little bit more. All right. Then when we talk about trusted relationship, obviously, you want to build a trusted relationship with each executive. However, if you don't have the time to meet with everybody, or maybe you haven't established a point where you can talk to them directly one-on-one, you can also leverage other people. And I think about the 3 I's. So leveraging them when it comes to information, so learning about that executive a little bit more. Influence, what do they already have the ability to do in order to influence their behavior? And then an introduction. So when an introduction is made from someone who's already established that trusted relationship, it's going to go a lot further. They're going to be more willing to bring you into their circle if it's coming from someone that they already trust. If your organization has administrative assistants at the executive level, definitely talk to them. They are wonderful resources and usually very patient human beings. So that could be great people to be talking to. All right. So the third component of really generating that leadership pull is looking at what that senior leader values, what they're passionate about. And some questions to ask about that is, what keeps them up at night? What do they value, as I mentioned? What do they measure? And so when we look at what a leader values versus what they measure, they're not always the same thing. So when we think about the measurement, that really relates to the business and what's important for the business. When we talk about the value, that's something that will remain the same for the person, whether they're at work or whether they're home or wherever they are. It's something that's just really important to them. And so we'll ask about that. We'll look at maybe where they're spending their money, if they're having any roadblocks and what those are. And so if we don't have the relationship yet with that leader to be asking these kinds of questions, we can also think about some of the more general interests, I guess, in the different areas. So if we're looking at human resources, maybe that person would be interested to know about FTEs that they're not backfilling because of some improvements that we made to the workflow. Maybe if we're looking at operations, they would be happy to know about cycle time being reduced. Or in the finance area, maybe a shorter cash conversion cycle. And so just kind of thinking also generically, but the more we can get to know a person and know what's individually important to them, the better. One example I have is when I went into an organization and I first started and I was going to run the CI program, I met with each of the senior leaders one-on-one. And when I walked into the room with one of them, he said, "I hate Lean." Like, he hates Lean. I just have not heard that before at that time. And when I was talking with him, I said, okay, just kind of accepted it. And then I started talking to him about other things, and I asked questions about what keeps him up at night and what about, And so I listened to him and sort of his story about his growth throughout the company and all of that. And so towards the end of the conversation, I said, would you be willing to let me work with one of your frontline employees? We would get together once a month and I would coach them kind of in between the times that we were meeting in order to solve a problem that was important to both them and their team. And he said, sure, we can do that. And so we committed to a 6-month period where we would do it. By the end of the 6 months, that executive was raving. He was a raving fan of continuous improvement because, as I learned, the executive had started in the organization 20 years prior as a frontline employee and slowly worked his way up to becoming an executive. So his passion and his value really was far more about that frontline engagement and what they had to say. And in this case, the frontline individual was really excited about CI and really excited about the problem that they were now independently able to solve and could tell their coworkers about it too, than he ever was about any kind of metric that the company might have achieved. So it's really important if you can have that one-on-one conversation to learn about that. Okay, so we're switching gears just a little bit. Mark shared a PDF. Have you put that in the chat recently, Mark? Okay.
Yes,
So
there's an attachment there. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, so he shared a PDF, and I don't know if you haven't had a chance to print it or if you can't be working on your computer right now. Also, if you have just a blank sheet of paper and a pen, that's a great option. We're just, we're going to be limited on time today, so I at least want to get you started. So if you can't get it all done today, you can work on it a little bit later. But we're going to be starting at looking at an assessment of your senior leaders. We're just going to focus on 3 for the time being. If there's more, cool, you can work on that also a little bit later. But so we're going to be talking about their readiness for change into doing a routine. So we're going to be starting by identifying what kind of routine would be really helpful for your senior leader to influence. Remember, I said they could be influencers for your CI program, to influence your CI program. And so before we go into it too far, I want to say that, first of all, this is a living document, so it may change over time, and their readiness for change may change over time. So be aware of that. I know that, some people in our audience are using pencil with an eraser, may be a good option too. The other thing I'll say is that while we are very transparent with a lot of the lean things that we do and tools that we have, this is one I'm pretty private about. I'm going to hold it close to the vest because we are talking about people that we don't already have close relationships with in some cases, and we don't necessarily want to advertise how we feel about that. So just a couple of things before we start with it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to have you do, and I'll give you a few minutes to work on this, is set up the routine like I just mentioned. And then we're going to list the names on the left-hand side, the rating that we give them in terms of their likelihood or their willingness to change. I usually use a 1 to 5 scale for the purposes of today. I just put 3 numbers, make it a little easier. And then the rationale for that. So to walk through this example, the executive routine that I have is that they're going to attend frontline huddles once a week. And in that huddle, they're going to be expressing appreciation to those who are involved. For Lucy, she got a 1, Henry got a 3, and Etta got a 2. So Lucy's 1 comes from the fact that she's been really vocal about her negative experience with continuous improvement at her last company. So we're guessing that we would give her a 1. Now, on the other hand, Henry got his Lean Six Sigma green belt at his past company, and he's often asking how he can help with lean. So we gave Henry a 3. And then Etta got a 2 because she is super busy, but she says she's fine with her staff doing continuous improvement if they don't have more important work to do. You may have heard that, so I put that one in there. Other fun fact, these are all my cats' names, so this is about accurate for their level of willingness to make changes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give you a few moments to fill this out for yourselves, and I'll just kind of chat in the background with Mark. Hopefully that doesn't disturb you too much while you're working on that. All right. Mark, do you know what the CI habit is that we have for executives at KaiNexus that we often promote?
There are many habits.
You want me to tell you?
Yeah, which one were you thinking of in particular?
I was thinking about, we've been talking with executives a lot lately about going into people's ideas, improvement ideas, and liking, acknowledging, and commenting on their ideas. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that, so I was thinking along the lines of KaiNexian habits and traits that lead to success at the company. And there's a lot of other good habits that leaders have, like, for example, an openness about admitting mistakes.
I wish there were a book about mistakes. Do you know where I could find a good book about that?
I didn't. I wasn't trying. I wasn't trying to hijack things, but there are some great stories about KaiNexus leaders in a book called "The Mistakes That Make Us."
Yeah,
But
it's a
but to steer, thank you, Stephanie. But to steer it back to the worksheet, I'll just add one other comment. Like, I love how, like, for example, you're talking about Lucy's experience. You're not labeling Lucy as being
right.
bad or resistant. You're just acknowledging we might have to really lean in and put more effort into engaging Lucy.
Yeah, for sure. When I had a really great mentor, Steve Dickinson, I didn't say I was going to mention his name, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind, who taught me, gosh, probably 15 years ago about, I don't know if you'd say managing a room, but like something along those lines. And he always talked about handling difficult behaviors. And he never mentioned the person. He said, it's never the person, it's always the behavior, because most behaviors have some reasoning behind them. So it's not that the person is just intentionally belligerent or loud or quiet or any of those kinds of things. There's usually some reason behind the behavior. So I thought that
From that
was good.
past experience. Yeah.
Yep, yep. All right, how are we doing on this? Let's see. Okay, cool. All right, we're going to move on. Again, if you if you did not finish, that's okay. You can come back to it in a bit. But we're going to move, let's see, to force field analysis. I love this name partly because it makes me think of Star Wars, but also it's super effective. And when you see a force field analysis template out in the wild, it probably doesn't look like this. It's usually left to right. So you see contributing factors on the left side and opposing on the right, and they have like arrows pointing towards the center, which is the behavior or the routine. In this case, it was just to fit everything on one sheet of paper. So this is what you got. All right, so with the force field analysis, it is not just about telling someone a compelling reason for them to make a change. I have my master's in public health, and we used to talk about the fact that if it were just about telling somebody why they should do something, then there would be no junk food, right? Because we know why, but there's reasons pushing against it that make us say, I don't want to stop eating junk food. There's some reasons that I'm not going to do that. So getting clear on both the reasons why it's important, so the contributing factors, as well as why there could be some pushback, it's really important in getting a routine and making a change. And so if we can reduce friction from change, that is going to be more effective than only focusing on the positives about that. All right, so when we do our activity next, we're going to start with the routine, and we could be doing a force field analysis for every individual, but for this exercise, we're just going to do it as the group and just kind of think about the group and what they might be experiencing. So I'll walk through an example here, and then I'll give you a little bit of time to try and work on this on your own. All right, so we talk about those attending the huddles, expressing appreciation. And so some good things, some good reasons for that is that it's an inexpensive way to recognize the staff. Sometimes we're spending all kinds of money on different systems and companies and all that, or whatever, for recognizing them. You'll get more steps in, always a plus. Real-time data. And that can be really helpful for decision making because that's often asked of executives. And then finding out how goals are cascading to the front line. Okay, so maybe these are all drivers for why a person might do it. Now, when there's that friction that I talked about, could be that they're already overwhelmed with other work to do. They might have a conflicting meeting during the stand-up time. They might be worried that the information will be disappointing to them, and maybe they don't have a good poker face. Maybe they can't hide their disappointment very easily. They also maybe have been told that they can come across as negative when asking staff questions. I think all of that is very real. So let's look at what we're going to do about that. Okay, so now on our sheet, learning what we just did. Oh, let me go back. I probably didn't give you any time to do it. I'm so sorry. Take some time to do this on your own. I'll do that first, and then we can go back to the next piece of it. All right. I am going to say that if anybody has some cool, like, opposing stuff they want to share, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'd be curious. But Mark, I wanted to say that one thing I find I'm seeing a lot of like connection with some of the work that you do with this stuff too.
Mhm.
I had when I did my last like in-person conversation about this, one of the issues that a person was having regarding the executive being willing to make a change boiled down to psychological safety.
Mhm.
And so when we think about our senior leadership team, I think that sometimes we have these like rose-colored glasses about how their life must be.
Mhm.
And we think like they're so confident, they have no worries, they just go out there and make it happen. And the reality is they have all eyes on them. They are making big decisions that could go wrong. And, and maybe sometimes they're leading people they used to be friends with. And, there's all these things that they are thinking about. And so I don't know, I think it was really interesting to note that psychological safety is one of those things that could be a friction point.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that somebody in a senior position feels a high level of psychological safety just because they're an executive. It depends on how the CEO or the board or other senior leaders are treating them in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a question that came in through the chat. What do the arrows represent? If you could speak to that.
Yeah, so actually in a typical force field analysis template, the arrows have a lot of meaning. So the arrows you can draw towards the center, they can be like, some of them are thicker and longer, and some of them are short and thin or something. But the length of the arrow and kind of the size of the arrow can indicate how much of a force it has toward that habit. So it can come from either direction. It can be like a really strong reason that somebody's going to want to do a behavior, or a really strong reason that they're not going to want to do the behavior. Okay, thanks for that question. Okay, I'm going to move to the next step, if that works. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I feel like this was a spoiler because you already saw this slide, but you're going to take now what you learned from your force field analysis that you just did, and you're going to then look at that and think, how can I apply what I just learned to some ideas I have to engage with that executive? And so in these examples, I have that for Lucy, we might leverage Henry to influence her. We could demonstrate prior wins and impact to the business. And we could also offer some standard work and talking points to guide a positive experience. So if you recall, one of the things that were opposing factors for them was that they might feel like they're going to say some negative stuff, or they're going to ask questions in a way that comes across as kind of negative to the people that they're talking to. So coaching them and maybe giving them some pointers on that could be helpful. With Henry, so Henry was a big advocate, we could ask him how he could better engage his peers, ask for some positive outcomes and stories from lean practices. And then Etta, we want to educate on the integration of CI with daily work. So, Etta was the one that said if they don't have anything more important to do. So we'll talk about how the work kind of goes together with their day-to-day. And then kind of like with Lucy, we would offer those standard talking points there. So go ahead and for yours, you can fill in some engagement ideas. We'll fill in the rest of this in just a minute. So just stop once you've done the engagement ideas.
There was a comment, Stephanie. I don't know if you would want to touch on this comment, but we can turn it into a question or you can react to it. Huddles are generally more efficient than standing meetings, but we need to now accommodate remote employees, and that can be trickier, especially if some are in the room, others are on the line. Some people call that hybrid. So engagement methods for both settings are essential. Do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
Okay, so, and we do, of course, with KaiNexus, we do a lot of huddles through virtual environments. So that's a really common thing for us in the virtual environment. Like we'll have like a recognition board virtually, so you can kind of see some kudos to people and do that. And I would just say, like, when I was reading to you some of the contributing factors, I think I put about steps in, thinking, well, that doesn't really apply for virtual. So you probably want to look at it from both angles of it and say, like, if you're engaging in person versus virtually, what are some of the contributing and opposing factors? I do agree that it's nice to be in person with people, but you also don't want to isolate folks who can't be there in person. So you'll want to make sure that, maybe like a good practice could be alternating, whether you're showing up in person, whether you're showing up virtually or something like that, to engage people in sort of a more even manner. And Mark, if you have something to add there too, I'm cool with that idea.
Yeah. I think we're still figuring that out. Within, KaiNexus has a lot of experience with hybrid meetings. One bit of technology that seems to help is that owl camera. So I'm almost always remote, but that camera, or a couple of those cameras in a room full of people, that camera does a really good job of zooming in on somebody who's speaking. So you're not just looking at a wide shot of the room. Like, that helps me stay engaged when I'm remote.
Right. Okay. I'm going to move forward if that works for everybody. Okay. So we're going to put that aside for a minute because we're going to start talking about habit science. One thing we look at a lot lately with KaiNexus is habit science, and it comes from these 3 books primarily. So The Power of Habit, Atomic Habits, and Tiny Habits. There is a QR code if you want to check out the webinars that we've been doing. I'm going to advance the slide though, so if you're going to take a picture, do it very quickly. Okay. All right. When we talk about habit loops, essentially they're made out of cues, routines, and rewards. The little guy in the middle is who we call OFI, our mascot, which stands for Opportunity for Improvement. So when we're thinking about this in sort of an individual level, so for me, I have been studying languages on my little Duolingo app for a little over 2 years now, every single day, haven't missed a day. And so when I think about my habit loop, when it comes to that, my cue is actually my coffee. So I make coffee in the morning, and that's my cue. So cues are really best if they're either like time, location, or I think one of the books at least calls it habit stacking, when it follows another habit that you have really ingrained in your head. I have coffee every day. I have to do it. All right. So that's a cue. The routine for me is studying my language. And that's changed a little bit, but at the core, that's what it is. And then reward is great if it's both. There's an immediate reward, a long-term reward, and especially if it ties to your envisioned identity. So in my case, my identity that I am like going toward is that I'm a woman who travels internationally and can speak the language wherever I go. So that's kind of how I define it. And so that's my reward there. But when we look at it from, like, when we're talking with people from KaiNexus and we're talking to customers or whomever, we look at it not just at the individual level, but how it interacts with the other levels in the organization. So for the example of the huddle, like attending huddles, maybe a cue would be simply that they get an Outlook notification. The routine is that they're attending the huddles. The reward for them might be that they're getting the real-time data so they can make good decisions, but that could become a cue for the next person, or maybe the person at the front line, that they're going to do more of the improvements that they're doing that cause the executive to get excited and to recognize them and so forth. And so there can be like this whole cycle that the executive, when I mentioned at the beginning that they're influencers, this is kind of how that cycle works, that they can influence habits as they go through the organization. Okay. So now we're going to think about, with the examples that you all wrote on your documents, we're going to look at potential cues and rewards that might work for each of these individuals. So if you remember, the cues work really well if they're time, location, or habit-based, so based on another habit. The rewards work really well if they can be short-term, like immediate, long-term, and then tied to their identity, which may take a little bit more information on your behalf to know that. So for this example, all three of them had calendar notifications. Now Lucy also got a phone reminder and had Henry checking in to say, hey, time to go to the huddle. And I will say that for people who are at the more, actively opposed or they're not so used to it, they may need a little bit more prompting, more cues to get them to get started with that cycle. And then on the rewards, so as I mentioned, the real-time data, public recognition, Henry's excited about seeing his employees happy about their work, getting recognized. Etta is driven because she's seeing goal alignment and measurable outcomes. She's also having increased confidence to delegate her work to other people because of what they're doing. And so I would say just start with, just a hypothesis of what might work. This, as I said, is a living document. And I believe that the cues and rewards need to be iterative. So you need to kind of be checking back and seeing what's working. If something's working today, it may not be working tomorrow. So you just kind of want to revisit this. But go ahead and take a minute and fill some of this in. And I would be curious if anybody has some cool reward ideas, especially because I will say we have been looking for really great reward ideas at the level to promote some of the behaviors that they're doing. So yeah, I'd be curious to see what y'all come up with.
And I'll throw a question at you, Stephanie. What are your thoughts around, recognition as a form of reward, as opposed to a lot of times people think first about something financial when they hear the word rewards?
Yeah, and are you talking about at the executive level or at the person they're talking to level? That's what I'd say.
Yeah, we're generally, generally the financial rewards flow top down, but recognition can really flow in any direction. And there are people putting in the chat, recognition boards, posting a company kudos for somebody who's doing the habit, handwritten thank you notes.
Yep. Oh yeah, thank you notes is great. For sure. Yeah, we have something we often will call, they can call it whatever they want, but we call it internally honor roll. So we have an honor roll where those people, we really do a shout out and kudos to those folks. But like I said before about the executives, being like everybody else, it's nice to hear thank you. And so I think about at KaiNexus, we have a weekly meeting, all company meeting, where everybody takes turns and shouts out coworkers as they go through and we each talk. I don't hear as many for our executives in the company for shouting out. And so I noticed last week somebody said, oh, I really want to shout out, Greg and Jeff. They don't hear it as much as everybody else does. And I'm sure, it's nice. I think everybody wants to be thanked. So I don't know if that answered the question, Mark, but yeah, okay.
In the chat, I got to read this. Somebody said balloons.
Oh, maybe not latex, because sometimes people have an allergy. But yes.
But somebody else commented that rewards vary from one person to another. So that could apply whether it's balloons or else.
Yeah, I've been at companies when they ask you up front, when you first start, to fill out this whole, what kinds of things motivate you. And they really did individualize. It was pretty cool. All righty. Okay, so when we talk about that generating pull, which I brought up quite a bit ago, one thing to make sure of is reflecting before you pitch. So when we think about what's going to generate it, it's kind of a combination of your CI program and you. So from the CI program standpoint, I would say really be honest about what your program currently provides and doesn't provide in terms of what that executive is seeking, and then what it realistically can in the future. So don't go over promising, be really real about what your program can do. And then in terms of you, make sure that the perception of working with you is really solid, and you're going to have to work on that over time and make sure you're building and reinforcing that positive relationship with the person. And once you have those two things that are really solid and they really see the value of it, you're going to get that buy-in and engagement going forward. Okay, so to summarize what we talked about, first of all, generating pull. So those 3 elements were around time, relationships, and what the individual values. We talked about establishing strong habit loops. And so that was the cue, routine, and reward. And so making sure that those are iterative too, that you're checking back and seeing how those are working and then adjust. And then checking in regularly. And when you're doing these check-ins, so part of it is thanking them for what they've already done, reiterating any behaviors that you have already established and talked about, and then just listening for ways that maybe you want to change that going forward. And that is what I have. So if you want to reach out and talk with me more, I would love to know about your action plans. So maybe what you're intending to do, maybe what is working, what's not working. And if you go down at the bottom of your little sheet that you have in front of you, it says next step or next steps. I think like what we talked about today, there was a lot of information. I don't know how much you kept up with it, but you probably have a lot of information on your little sheet of paper. It takes just, doing one thing coming out of today to get you started on your own habit and get you started with your own momentum. So take a second and just jot down your next step that you're going to take. And if you're feeling like you need that extra boost of commitment, you can put it in the chat so other folks also know that you have said you're going to do this next step to make it happen. And that's all I've got.
All right. Well, Stephanie, thank you. That was quite a lot. So if you say that's all you got, that was a great session. Thank you for leading us through that. Thank you for the worksheet. As promised, we'll have time for Q&A. So I'll encourage people, please do continue submitting questions using the Q&A button, if you would, please. But before that, we have a few announcements. Next slide. So this is our last webinar of the year. We generally do these about once a month. Our next webinar is coming up next year, January 17th, 1 o'clock Eastern. Registration will be open soon. We'll email you about that webinar since you've attended this one today if you registered, or you can go sign up to get notified at kainexus.com/webinars. Professor John Grout from Berry College is one of the world's experts in mistake proofing or error proofing or poka-yoke or however you might say it. So I'm really excited that John is going to be doing that webinar. I encourage you to also, if you go to kainexus.com/webinars, click on the big KaiNexus Webinars on Demand button on the right-hand side. That will show you, give you access to the entire library of more than 100 webinars, including, as Stephanie mentioned, the 3 Habits series webinars that Morgan Wright and Greg Jacobson from KaiNexus presented earlier this year. You can find those there, or when we email you the slides tomorrow, you can go click on the QR code that was on Stephanie's slide. So a lot of great content there if you're looking for things to learn over, kind of if it's a slow time at the end of the year for you, lots of content to go and dig into. Next slide, please. We were doing a different type of book giveaway contest this time. We've been doing those as a way to get people to spread the word about the webinars. We have a book giveaway contest that is going to be open until the 15th. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. We're collaborating, me and KaiNexus, giving away a set of 6 signed books of the books that I've written or co-authored over the last 15 years. That contest is open through December 15th. Please click on the link in the chat if you'd like to enter, if you haven't already. Next slide. We invite you to check out our blog.kainexus.com. Lots of great articles there about all things continuous improvement. And next, we also have a podcast. You can go to kainexus.com/podcast or just search your favorite podcast app for KaiNexus. We should be easy to find. The audio of today's webinar will be in there if you'd like to revisit that and listen and think about it when you're out on a walk or in the car. You can share it with colleagues, or again, the recording of the video here with the slides and everything will also be available. Okay. And then final announcement, as you leave the webinar, you should end up with a browser prompt to fill out a feedback survey. And we'd love for you to fill out that survey. We do read those. We hear what you liked about the webinar, what ideas you have for future webinar topics. We get about an 8% survey completion rate usually. So we're doing an experiment here. Make the prompt. Hopefully it's a queue, I think, and filling out these feedback forms will become a new habit. So please do give us your feedback there. All right. And with that, Stephanie, I think we'll open the floor for Q&A, and we've got Stephanie's contact info there. So I'm going to start with Ryan's question, Stephanie. So what is the strategy to obtain buy-in and engagement from leadership and or staff in hybrid or remote environments? The lack of proximity and subsequent engagement, for example, Gemba walks, is a major barrier to rolling out an effective CI program, in my experience. Are there any ways to mitigate distance when it comes to influence?
Yeah, I actually just read something on LinkedIn about a leader who got rid of a lot of things that were really valuable that really helped with the virtual environment. And so, for instance, I would say a lot of the time that we spent, so if we're in person, right, you get the opportunity, they always say like water cooler chat or things like that, where you get the opportunity to engage with one another in settings outside of a meeting. When you're having virtual interactions with folks, I would say don't discount that like water cooler talk when you're in meetings. I know that especially like in Lean, we're always thinking, efficiency and effectiveness and all that. But really the way to get to that and the way to get that team working well together is to have genuine personal connections and not just connecting over the business. And so that would just be my recommendation, is to just spend the time that it takes to make that happen. If you have periods where you can do visits with one another, especially as a whole team rather than kind of one-on-one visits, I think investing in that is important. I know with KaiNexus, I've been a remote worker, and we have, a set annual meeting, a mid-annual meeting. We have the user conference, and it's just a few times a year. But when we get together, it sort of like rejuvenates this connection that we have with one another. And as it ties to the conversation we're having today, when you feel that connection with folks, that it becomes a strong contributing factor to whatever the common thing that you're trying to drive is. And so I would just say that's very important.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm going to take what Carol submitted and turn that into two separate questions here. So, first, the statement, this appeared to be for more advanced practitioners. Do you have something for a novice? So maybe another way of asking that is like, tips for learning change management and engagement basics, if you will.
Yeah, I think the content today, or the context maybe, has been around the executive side of things. Honestly, like some of the wording I would have just changed a little bit differently for anybody or any change. Yeah, I mean, I think any kind of change management that you want to do, you're going to be involving other people, I would assume. And so any change that you're trying to drive, it involves learning the reasons why, like what motivates somebody. It involves learning the things that are keeping them from making the change, but also being really very real about what the change will do and it won't do. And I think the first thing I talked about was the elements about timing and relationships and what they're passionate about. If you can take the time and learn that about whomever it is that you are working with, I think that's going to be really valuable for you. Oh, I don't hear your audio, Mark.
I was muted, my mistake. I just put a link in the chat for Carol or for anybody, it looked like about a 5 or 6 minute video, I think, on change management basics. So I encourage people to check that out. And we do have a really good YouTube channel. Second question from Carol. Lean Lean is new for my organization, but Six Sigma is not. The opposition appears to come from the Six Sigma practitioners. Any guidance on getting them on board? And Stephanie is a master black belt here, kind of can help us bridge if there's a gap between these methods and some of the history. What are your thoughts there, Stephanie?
So I was raised in Lean Six Sigma. In other words, there was the integration of Lean and Six Sigma in the very first organization where I worked. And so I don't see them as that separate from one another. I will say I did become an agilist. And so I also saw there being separation between like project management and Lean. And so I think in any of those cases where you have like a certain methodology or mindset, and you kind of view it as totally different from the other one, I think it's important to know what's behind that. So directly, asking questions around, okay, like what do you see as being the strongest value of the method here? What do you see as being, the concerns that you have about this other method? And then as much as you can, just kind of bring them along for the journey of seeing the value of what it can bring. I don't know. I don't have a really direct answer for you around that, but I think it's there. I like them. I like it all. Obviously, I see reasons for the Six Sigma side of things. I see a lot of reasons for the Lean side of things. And so there's definitely value that can be had from all of it. So, yeah, I would just try to dig a little bit further into where the opposition lies.
Yeah, and I think some of the things you shared today about leaning in, pun unintended, who cares if the pun was intended or not, right? But leaning in to engage instead of writing somebody off. I think when you sense that opposition or resistance, we really, kind of have to go, as you were saying, understand what is driving that. It could be previous bad experience. It could be unfamiliarity. It could be fear of like, oh gosh, well, I don't understand Lean, and that might make me look bad, when they know Six Sigma really well. Yeah. I think, and remembering that when you push, it's a natural human reaction to get pushed back.
Yeah, and I will say, like earlier in my career, I was very maybe dogmatic about Lean, Six Sigma, like all the tools and the techniques, and it goes this way and it goes that way. And over time, I had some mentors or some, I don't know, maybe leaders who would maybe forbid me to even use certain terms, and I had to go around the terms and use different terms, or and just the way I spoke was in some cases rubbing people the wrong way because they didn't know that term. And so the one example that I shared where I had the conversation with the executive, that place I pretty much exclusively talked problem solving. I didn't talk Lean, I didn't talk Six Sigma, I just talked problem solving. And then yeah, my leader would always say I was creating an army of problem solvers. I don't love the army tone, but like the idea of having a big network of problem solvers, that was really what I was trying to get at. So that's another thing, I think, when you're trying to get people to maybe open up a little bit further, maybe use language that they're really used to, and some tactics that they're already kind of used to, but you would call them something different. So just another way.
Yeah. We got a question here from Alan. What are some methods to help justify the investment? In other words, cost for executives and their participation. The cost is number 2. From my experience, behind time is the top deterrent to adopting CI implementations. If executive time is more expensive than frontline team member time.
I see. Okay, I thought I'm interpreting that as what's the ROI for anybody in the company. Excuse me, doing Lean.
I think that's how I'm reading it. But the ROI, the cost part of the ROI for executive participation, the threshold might be higher, or maybe Alan can clarify if we're not quite answering the question.
Well, I'll start like jabbering and see if maybe I'm hitting it. And if not, he can let us know. They are probably paid more than a lot of us are, I would say. So, in some ways the ROI does have to be there. And, But the time that we are talking about, like with our behavior from KaiNexus, we ask for 15 minutes a week. And we demonstrate that with the 15-minute investment a week they have in liking, commenting, and all that, that we're seeing a major impact in the engagement level of the front line. We're seeing more ideas come through. We're seeing more ideas completed for improvements that the front line is doing. And so at the executive level, it's kind of a cool way to look at it because they can invest less time and have a greater impact than, with the front line. Sometimes we'll have them sit in a room for 5 days and do an event or something. Where, at the executive level, they can spend an hour and get huge returns. So I don't know if that helps at all, but did Alan write more in there?
There was last, and we can wrap up on this, the clarification, mainly, how do you justify this, maybe more broadly, the investment in CI to executives?
Oh gosh, that was probably another webinar.
So actually, literally, there was. I put a link in the chat of a previous KaiNexus webinar. But what are your thoughts?
Said that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really cool that we can do that pretty readily with our software, because we capture impact, and so we're always monitoring that. I don't know. There's stages that you can do in terms of looking at impact. And I wouldn't always be looking at the dollar sign because a lot of times that's sort of a like a lagging indicator maybe. But if you're looking at indicators that are showing positive impact in a short period of time, just making sure that you're capturing up front when you're about to do some improvement work, what it is that you're looking to change, what's the problem, what's the impact of the problem you're seeing, and being really clear about that. Because when you're really clear about that as part of your discipline, then that makes it a lot easier on the back end to be able to see what the impact is and how it's impacting the company as a whole. I do think you should track that because even if you have an executive today who says they don't care about that stuff, your executive in the future may care about that stuff a lot. So I do think it's important to be tracking the impact of the work that is being done.
Yes. That's a great answer, and people who are using KaiNexus already can do a lot of that tracking in the system. And if people are looking for help with that, maybe they can contact us here at KaiNexus or check out more at our website, KaiNexus.com. Stephanie, this was great. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Thank you for sharing the worksheet and your thoughts and experiences and guiding us through this today. I want to thank everybody for attending, and we'll hope to see you at future KaiNexus webinars. And again, please check out everything that's in the webinar library at kainexus.com/webinars or our YouTube channel. There's a lot to check out there. So again, Stephanie, thank you, and happy holidays to you and yours.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for joining.